Hey everybody, welcome to the Berean Room Podcast. I'm Pastor Yadiel Dominguez, and here at the Berean Room Podcast, we like to answer your toughest questions with a biblical worldview. So today's question comes in like this. What is predestination? And so some have argued, right, from Romans chapter 8, verse 29, that predestination is based on God's foreknowledge in the sense that God looked down in the corridors of time and saw who would freely choose him to believe, and then he predestined them. So that position assumes that foreknowledge here only means knowing in advance, right? In the Bible, however, knowledge is often used as a sense of personal intimacy. So, for example, when Adam knew Eve and she conceived a son, Genesis chapter 4, verse 1 talks about that. So God's foreknowledge is linked to his foreloving. Right? We see in Romans chapter 8, verse 30, that everyone who was foreknown was not just foreknown, they were also predestined. They were called, they were justified and glorified. So does God glorify everyone? Does God justify everyone? No. So clearly then, in terms of what this passage is dealing with, God does not call everyone, God does not predestine everyone, and God does not foreknow everyone. But in Romans chapter 8, verse 29 and 30, foreknowledge must have the sense of intimacy and personal calling. And so it can only refer to God's elect, right? So God's predestination doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not just simply for the purpose of saving us from sin. Listen, verse 29 shows us the goal or the purpose of salvation. It's so that we might be conformed to the likeness of his son. So ultimately, the reason God saved you and me is for the honor and the glory of his son, that he might be the firstborn, right? The goal in creation is that God would give us a gift to his son, many who are reborn into Christ's likeness. So election is necessary because, let's just think about it, friends, we're totally depraved. Totally. In other words, we would not choose God unless he first chose us. So the process of election, as it's worked out in your life and in my life, it doesn't violate our free will. That's the misconception. So the doctrine of irresistible grace does not mean the doctrine of divine coercion. It's as if God is bullying you into submission to do his will. Rather, it's a compelling kind of persuasion. The devil has blinded the eyes of the world, as stated in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. And once our eyes have been enlightened by the Spirit of the living God, we see clearly what God has done for us. And if grace were resistible, this would mean that the person who can resist God's will is some kind of a strong and powerful individual, and the one who can't, and therefore can't get saved, is some kind of a weakling. And then that's not the biblical picture. Election is always through human agency. That means that God uses other believers to communicate the gospel to the lost, right? Therefore, we can't excuse ourselves from sharing the gospel. We can't say, well, if he's God's elect, God's going to save him anyway. No. Or God doesn't need me to do the job. And of course, it's true that God doesn't need any of us to do his will, but it's equally true that God uses those who are willing to obey him. So the doctrine of election should motivate us to share the gospel, not out of fear, but because we want to be used by God to do God's will. I hope you found this video encouraging. God bless. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Please like, share, and subscribe to our podcast page where we'll have more videos coming up soon with more questions. So if you do have a question about anything, go ahead and post it below on the comment section. Again, thank you so much for watching the Berean Room Podcast. We'll see you guys soon.